Hey there, welcome back. Tonight we're taking a quiet journey into the fading light of the Roman Republic, following the soft, uneven footsteps that carried Julius Caesar from a fragile childhood into the shadowed corridors of power, and eventually into the place where his life would spill across the marble floor of a Senate house. For now, though, the world is calm. You hear only the faint hum of a city waking under pale Roman skies, merchants lifting their shutters, sandals brushing over stone, distant temple bells humming through morning air. And somewhere among those early sounds, a young boy is beginning a life that will rise, fracture, and reshape the world long after his heartbeat falls silent. By watching this video, you'll learn how Caesar's early years shaped his ambition, how the weakening republic wove the conditions for his rise, and how the same forces that elevated him also prepared the hands that would one day take his life. Imagine the quiet texture of Rome around 85 BCE, narrow streets lined with rough plastered walls, the scent of warm bread drifting from small ovens, dust rising gently where cattle were led toward the forum. The republic feels old, as if its joints ache beneath the weight of too many wars and too many ambitions. Factions whisper behind heavy curtains. Families cling to fading power. The world is changing, but softly, like fabric loosening under years of strain. Before we begin, a small note. If you enjoy these calm journeys through history, I upload new videos every day, so consider subscribing and turning on the bell. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? I love imagining people drifting off to the same story under different skies. Now let's begin. You find yourself drifting toward the Subura, the dense plebeian district where Julius Caesar spent much of his early life. In the dimness of dawn, oil lamps flicker behind wooden shutters, and you can almost sense the mixture of uncertainty and potential surrounding his young household. Caesar belonged to an ancient but weakened patrician line, the Julii, proud in name but modest in wealth. It is a curious foundation, noble ancestry held up by fragile pillars. His father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, died when the boy was still young, leaving the household quieter, more vulnerable. His mother, Aurelia, strong-willed and fiercely intelligent, guided him with a firm but gentle presence. You can picture her in the courtyard, arranging small offerings at the household shrine, incense curling upward like a thin, silver thread. She taught him discipline, clarity, and the subtle art of listening, qualities that would one day make him both adored and feared. The city around him was not kind. Rome trembled under the harsh dictatorship of Sulla, whose prescriptions, long lists of enemies condemned to death, were nailed publicly onto wooden boards. The smell of torch smoke lingered, and the clatter of soldiers' boots often signaled the ruin of another family. In this atmosphere of fear, Caesar learned that power was not a distant abstraction. It was something that could enter your doorway without knocking. This is when Caesar made one of the quiet but defining choices of his life. Sulla demanded he divorce Cornelia, his young wife, and the daughter of a fierce political rival. Caesar refused, not with swords or shouting, but with stillness. It is strange how sometimes the most dangerous act is simply to stand your ground. Sulla spared him reluctantly, remarking that in Caesar he sensed many Mariuses, many potential threats, hidden within his calm young frame. So Caesar left Rome for a time, walking roads lined with cypress and dusty stones, carrying little more than a few garments and a determination that felt sharper than any blade. These early departures, these enforced exiles, shaped him like slow, steady chiseling. They taught him that survival required adaptability, that safety was a fragile luxury, and that ambition, once awakened, could not be easily set aside. As he traveled, he joined the army, serving in Asia and Cilicia. You can almost see him now, standing beneath a hot Anatolian sun, watching dust swirl around bronze helmets. He wasn't yet the figure whose name would echo across centuries, but already he moved with a kind of measured confidence. Soldiers admired him, officers noticed him. In quiet tents, lit by trembling lamplight, Caesar studied rhetoric and strategy, letting the patterns of leadership take root in his mind. There is a soft rhythm to these early years, a slow layering of skills, friendships, and small triumphs. He rescued a fellow soldier in battle, earned honors for bravery, and learned to speak with that distinctive blend of warmth and calculation that later shaped his political power. Even here, far from the marble thresholds of Rome, whispers began. This young man could rise far. Yet when he returned to the city after Sulla's death, the Rome he encountered felt brittle, as if built from layers of old grievances. Senators plotted in dim chambers. Rivalries simmered beneath the surface. The Republic had grown vast, too vast perhaps, and its institutions struggled under the weight of expansion. Corruption stretched like ivy across political life. Debts soared. Armies grew more loyal to generals than to the state. And into this fragile ecosystem stepped Caesar, charming, articulate, ambitious, shaped by hardship. As he walked through the forum, the morning sun turning marble to soft gold, he would have seen not just monuments and crowds, but opportunity. Power in Rome was shifting, loosening, and he sensed the cracks where a new kind of authority could emerge. But with every rise in influence, a shadow lengthened beside him. The more Caesar succeeded, the more certain senators felt their world narrowing. To them, he embodied more than personal charisma. He represented a future they feared, a future where one man, not many, directed the fate of the Republic. Tonight, as you drift through these early scenes of his life, the tension remains barely perceptible, like a faint tremor beneath stone, but it is already forming. Each small choice, each honor won, each friend gained, and each enemy awakened, is pulling Caesar quietly and inevitably toward the Ides of March. For now, the city settles under the soft embrace of evening. Oil lamps glow behind colonnades, and the Tiber moves silently beneath the bridges. Caesar walks through the forum with youthful certainty, unaware that the path he has begun to carve will one day lead him toward a chamber filled with whispers, folded togas, and waiting knives. Whatever else happens, this is where the story truly begins. Part 2. The Making of a Rising Star. Morning light drifts gently over Rome, softening the edges of temples and rooftops, as the young Julius Caesar steps more firmly into the world that will one day tremble beneath his name. You can imagine him walking through narrow streets still damp with dawn, the smell of clay, warm bread, and distant incense mingling in the air. His ambitions are quiet for now, folded like parchment inside the chambers of his mind, but they pulse steadily, gathering shape with each new experience. Caesar returned to Rome after Sulla's death with a sense of renewal, much like a traveler stepping back into a garden that had once been unsafe. The prescriptions had ended. The city breathed easier, yet Rome was still restless, caught in the uneasy space between tradition and change. Senators whispered their grievances behind shaded porticos. Tribunes gestured with fierce urgency in crowded assemblies. Across the empire, distant armies carved out uncertain loyalties. In this world of shifting sands, Caesar moved with the patience of someone who had learned to survive. His first steps were modest. He practiced law, speaking with a clarity that mesmerized crowds. His voice, warm but sharp, carried through the forum like a ribbon of sound, weaving through stone columns. People gathered not only to hear his arguments, but to watch how he carried himself. The slight tilt of his head, the controlled cadence, the glimmer of confidence behind his eyes. He won cases others considered impossible, not through force, but through charm and unwavering presence. Even here, in these early courtrooms filled with murmurs and dust, he began building the reputation that would one day inspire both love and panic. But Caesar was not formed only by the applause of the forum. There were darker, quieter experiences that carved deeper layers into him. One of the most famous, almost surreal in its intimacy, came during his journey across the Aegean Sea, long before his rise to power. He was captured by pirates. Imagine the scene: a small vessel gliding through sunlit waters, the creak of rope, the scent of salt, and olive wood drifting through the warm air. Suddenly, dark sails appear at the horizon. The sea quiets. Oars slice toward the Roman ship with smooth, predatory strokes. Within moments, Caesar and his companions are surrounded. The pirates board, their voices rough, their nets heavy with weapons, and Caesar, not yet the conqueror of Gaul or the master of Rome, is taken. Yet even in captivity, he remained unmistakably himself. He joked with his captors. He demanded better treatment, even shushing them when he wished to sleep. And when they asked for a ransom, he told them to raise it, insisting that a man of his quality deserved a higher price. You can almost see him there, leaning on a coil of rope beneath a wide Aegean sky, speaking calmly as if he were a guest rather than a prisoner. The pirates laughed, thinking him arrogant, but Caesar was not boasting. He was simply revealing the truth as he saw it. After his release, he raised a small fleet, returned to the island, captured the pirates, and had them executed, just as he had promised them he would, almost casually during his captivity. This mixture of charm and steel would follow him through life, softening his public image while sharpening the fears of those who watched his ascent. Back in Rome, Caesar began stepping into official roles: military tribune, questor, and later praetor. These titles may sound distant, almost ceremonial, but each one gave him new ground, new networks, and new authority. His alliances deepened, his rivalries sharpened. He understood people, their hopes, fears, and weaknesses, and used that understanding with a grace that seemed effortless. His marriage to Cornelia had bound him to influential families. Her death left him grieving, but more determined than ever. He remarried Pompeia, linking himself to the powerful line of Sulla's successor. His political instincts grew more refined, like a blade polished through repetition. He also made a journey to Hispania as a young official. There, in the quiet countryside, surrounded by mountains colored gold under late afternoon sun, he saw a statue of Alexander the Great. It is said that when he stood before it, he wept, not because of sadness, but because he felt he had done so little compared to the Macedonian conqueror at the same age. This moment, a blend of introspection and ambition, reveals something essential about Caesar. He lived in constant dialogue with destiny, imagining a version of himself that reached beyond the boundaries of Rome, beyond the limits of tradition. His early years were more than preparation. They were an unfolding argument between what he was and what he felt capable of becoming. As his influence grew, so too did the quiet unease among Rome's elite. Senators noticed the crowds that flocked to him. They noticed how soldiers respected him, how debtors adored him, how young men mirrored his style. They noticed the spark of something Rome had not seen in generations, a figure who might rise above the old structures entirely. This fear did not yet have a name. It whispered through colonnades, passed between senators over cups of watered wine, settled like a thin dust over every debate. They told themselves it was just politics, just rivalry, just youthful ambition. Yet many sensed that Caesar belonged not to the Republic's past, or even its present, but to something still forming, something larger. Tonight, as you drift gently through these early chapters of his life, you can feel the slow expansion of his world. The Republic is beginning to loosen around its edges. Caesar's presence is still modest, still forming, but steady as the turning of a wheel. Every step he takes creates new possibilities and new shadows. In the quiet streets of Rome, oil lamps glow as evening falls. Caesar returns home, wrapped in the warmth of triumphs, small and great, unaware of the distant storm clouds gathering beyond the horizon. For now, he is simply a rising star, brilliant, charming, ambitious, walking a path that will eventually transform Rome, reshape the West, and lead him toward a Senate house where destiny waits with patient hands. The world is listening, though it does not yet understand. And Caesar, with each calm breath he draws beneath the Roman night, is drifting slowly, inevitably, toward the fate that history already knows. Part 3. Storms over Gaul, storms within Rome. Dawn settles gently over the Alps, brushing their snowy ridges with pale gold, as Julius Caesar advances toward the chapter of his life that will elevate him beyond the scale of ordinary Roman ambition. You can almost feel the crisp mountain air around him, sharp, clean, and restless, as if nature itself sensed the magnitude of the path he was beginning to carve. Gaul lay before him, vast, forested, unpredictable. And behind him, Rome stirred uneasily, watching a man it could no longer fully contain. When Caesar accepted the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, it might have seemed like a distant appointment in a world already wide with territories. But for him, it was something far more profound, a stage broad enough to test every skill, every instinct, every ambition he had shaped since childhood. The Roman Republic had given him boundaries. Gaul would give him a frontier. He arrived not as a conqueror, but as a strategist listening to the land. Imagine him standing at the edge of a dense Gallic forest, the scent of pine drifting through the cool air, the ground soft with fallen needles. Soldiers gather around him, adjusting their cloaks against the breeze. The wind rustles through the branches like quiet voices, and Caesar watches, absorbing everything with the same calm intensity that defined him in the Forum. The tribes of Gaul were many, each with its own leaders, alliances, fears, and hopes. To Rome, they seemed fractured. To Caesar, they represented an opportunity to demonstrate mastery, not only of battle, but of human psychology. He moved with remarkable speed, shifting legions as if they were pieces on a smooth marble board. One moment, he was negotiating with chieftains beside crackling campfires. The next, he was building fortifications so quickly that enemies doubted their own senses. Gaul became the forge in which Caesar refined the qualities that made him unforgettable. His legions adored him because he stood among them, sharing cold nights, muddy boots, and long marches beneath gray skies. He addressed them not as distant commander, but as companion, a man who understood hardship, who moved tirelessly across rough terrain with unbroken resolve. In the winter camps, where frost clung to wooden beams and the smell of smoke drifted through narrow passages, Caesar wrote dispatches to Rome. His reports were crisp, vivid, and designed with care. They told of heroism, danger, and glory, all filtered through his measured, irresistible voice. These commentaries were not simply records, they were mirrors, reflecting an image of Caesar as the Republic had rarely seen in any leader. Disciplined, brilliant, unstoppable. And as these dispatches reached Rome, senators read them with growing unease. Those who admired him found in his words a vision of possibility. Those who feared him found something sharper, the outline of a man whose influence could no longer be managed by tradition alone. Meanwhile, the battles grew larger, more intricate. Think of the rivers gliding through Gallic valleys, their surfaces dark as polished obsidian. Think of Roman bridges rising overnight with astonishing precision, the creak of wood and the rhythmic pounding of stakes echoing in the morning mist. Think of chieftains whose voices thundered across open plains, confronting a commander whose calm eyes never wavered. Caesar's victories in Gaul were not inevitable. They were earned through relentless discipline and strategic brilliance. He adapted to the landscape, the enemy, and the shifting tides of tribal alliances. To follow his campaigns is to wander through mountains cloaked in fog, across fields of tall grass whispering beneath the wind, through fortified camps lit by the orange glow of torches. But for every triumph in Gaul, a shadow grew in Rome. The Senate watched the news of his victories with the same tension one feels while observing a storm at sea, awed by its beauty, but terrified of its power. A successful general with loyal legions was no mere participant in Roman politics. He was a force that could unmake the fragile balance the Republic used to preserve itself. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, and even his son-in-law, began to drift away, pulled by senatorial fear and his own pride. He had been Rome's greatest general, the man of 3 triumphs, the glory of the East. But now Caesar's star rose higher, brighter, casting shadows Pompey could not ignore. The death of Caesar's daughter, Julia, Pompey's wife, loosened the emotional thread binding the two men. What had once been partnership began to feel like rivalry. Slowly, the political atmosphere in Rome thickened like humid summer air before a storm. Senators whispered that Caesar's command should not be renewed. Others argued that he should return to Rome without his legions, a command they knew he would never accept. The Republic had laws, but its laws were stretched thin by fear, ambition, and the vast size of the territory it governed. And all the while, Caesar remained in Gaul, unaware of the full depth of the anxiety growing across the forum's marble floors. Nights in camp passed with the soft crackle of fires, the murmurs of soldiers cleaning their weapons, the scent of damp earth after rain. Caesar would study maps, running his fingers along drawn rivers and sketched ridges, imagining solutions where others saw obstacles. He was becoming something rare, a man who understood war, politics, and narrative all at once. He could command armies, negotiate alliances, and shape public opinion through his writing. It was a combination that inspired devotion among his followers and dread among his rivals. By the time Caesar completed his conquest of Gaul, the world had changed around him. He had grown into a figure capable of reshaping the Republic itself. He had wealth, soldiers, political support, and a name that carried across Europe like the echo of a marching legion. And in Rome, the fear crystallized. If Caesar returned with his legions, he might not walk quietly into the Senate's embrace. He might walk into Rome as the most powerful man it had ever produced. Tonight, as you let your thoughts settle like dust along a Gallic path, imagine Caesar gazing toward the south, where the road home stretched beneath an endless sky. He does not yet know the choice that awaits him, nor the river that will become the symbol of his defiance. But the winds of Gaul are shifting, and in their whisper, the Republic can almost hear the distant sound of approaching thunder. The storm is forming, in the forests, in the Senate, in the hearts of men. And Caesar is drifting slowly toward the moment when he must decide whether to step across the line that will change Rome forever. Part 4. The Rubicon Whispers. Its warning. Evening settles over northern Italy with a softness that makes every hill seem older, every tree more contemplative. The air is cool, touched by the faint scent of pine and damp soil, and the sky deepens into shades of violet and muted gold. Julius Caesar stands at the threshold of a decision that will echo for millennia. But for a moment, everything is quiet. The kind of quiet that gathers before the world changes. His legions have followed him south from Gaul, marching along roads carved through riverside valleys and across windy plains. Their armor carries the dust of conquered lands, but their loyalty is clean and unwavering. You can almost hear the muted clink of metal as they adjust their gear, waiting for a signal that has not yet been given. Around them, the landscape feels suspended, as though nature itself is holding its breath. In Rome, debates burn like scattered embers across the Senate. Some senators insist that Caesar must disband his legions before returning. Others fear the consequences of humiliating a man who commands both soldiers and affection from the people. Pompey now stands at the Senate's side, no longer Caesar's ally, but his appointed counterweight. Letters travel back and forth, heavy with accusation, caution, and quiet desperation. Caesar reads these messages in dimly lit quarters along the frontier. The lamplight flickers across his face, revealing a man measuring each slight, each demand, each whispered threat. His political enemies insist he surrender command. They know that without his legions, he becomes vulnerable. They know that a trial awaits him if he returns unprotected. The laws of the Republic have been reshaped to trap him, gently at first, then with unmistakable clarity. He understands their fear. He also understands the game they are playing. Outside his tent, the murmurs of soldiers drift through the night. Fires crackle softly, sending thin trails of smoke into the dark. The scent of charred wood mingles with the crisp winter air. Caesar steps out, pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders, and gazes southward toward a small, unassuming river flowing through the countryside. The Rubicon, a narrow ribbon of water, hardly remarkable in its appearance. Its surface reflects the pale shimmer of the moon, trembling slightly under the cool breath of night. It is not a river known for power or beauty, only for the boundary it marks. To cross it with an army is to commit treason. To cross it is to ignite a civil war. Caesar walks toward it slowly, the ground beneath his boots damp from the evening mist. Each step feels deliberate, not heavy, but conscious. He pauses at the river's edge, the faint ripple of water brushing lightly against the stones. In moments like this, history does not thunder, it whispers. Behind him, the legions wait in disciplined silence. Torches glow like scattered embers in the night. The soft jingle of harnesses blends with the distant call of an owl hidden among the trees. Soldiers glance at one another, half aware that something irreversible is unfolding. Caesar's thoughts drift backward, not in haste, but in a calm, circular movement. To his youth, when Sulla had demanded his submission, to the pirates who once mocked him, to the forum trials where crowds leaned in as he spoke, to the years in Gaul where he shaped both land and legend. Each memory is like a quiet stone placed into the foundation of this moment. He knows what returning to Rome without his legions means. He knows the Senate will not greet him with warmth, nor with fairness. He knows that surrender would unmake everything he has built, not only for himself, but for his soldiers, his allies, and the fragile political world shifting around him. Yet he also knows what crossing the river means: blood, division, a republic strained until its structure cracks. The Rubicon flows on, unaware of the weight placed upon its narrow waters. In stories written much later, Caesar is said to have stood there a long time, his face illuminated by moonlight, his cloak stirring gently in the river breeze. Some say he spoke softly to himself, reflecting on the gamble ahead. Others imagine him calm and decisive, the choice already carved into his mind. Then at last, he steps forward. The sound is delicate, a splash, a ripple folding outward, the faint shift of wet pebbles beneath his sandals. His horse follows, then the standard bearers, then the legions, the rhythm of their movements blending into the night like a slow heartbeat. The torches cast wavering reflections upon the water as the army crosses behind him in steady formation. This small river, insignificant for centuries, becomes a threshold, and Caesar, who once drifted as a young man through the dangerous streets of Sulla's Rome, now moves toward a destiny that will transform the entire Mediterranean world. Lights flicker across the hills as more soldiers cross. Their armor glints like distant stars. The quiet of the night deepens, as if absorbing the decision into its depths. The Republic, vast and ancient, has already begun to tremble, not with noise, but with the subtle shift that comes before a great structure changes shape. And somewhere in Rome, senators sit awake beneath lamplight, unaware that the choice has been made, unaware that the calm river they once ignored has been crossed, and that the old world is gently, silently beginning to dissolve. Tonight, as you let your breath settle with the rhythm of the Rubicon's whisper. Imagine the soft glow of torches on the water, the careful stride of Caesar leading his legions southward, and the sense of a future unfolding, not with triumph, not with panic, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide. The road ahead is long, and destiny, once stirred, does not return to sleep. Part 5. Dictator in a Fractured World. Dawn settles softly over the Italian countryside as Caesar moves south with the quiet steadiness of a tide approaching shore. The winds that brush across the fields feel older now, touched by the knowledge that a civil war has begun, though few words have been spoken and few swords have yet been drawn. Rome, resting under its pale morning sky, senses change drifting toward it, like distant thunder muffled by hills. Caesar enters the city not in conquest, but in calm assurance. Many senators have fled, taking their anxieties and unanswered questions with them. Pompey, once the lion of Rome, has withdrawn to the east, gathering allies and legions. In the empty streets, footsteps echo softly against marble, and stray leaves rustle along the edges of the forum. Power, for the first time in years, lies unclaimed in the open air, but Caesar does not rush to seize it. He pauses, listening to the city the way a physician listens to a trembling pulse. Rome is wounded, divided by fear, paralyzed by indecision. The Republic's institutions feel brittle, like clay, left too long in the sun. And Caesar, who knows the fragility of structures built on old promises, moves carefully. He addresses the Senate, those who remain, with measured words, no threats, no overt triumph, only the calm insistence that he seeks stability, not vengeance. His tone is soft, persuasive, even paternal. It reflects years spent understanding both the desires and insecurities of Rome's powerful families. Yet beneath that gentleness lies something firmer, a claim to legitimacy forged through conquest, resolve, and the unwavering devotion of his soldiers. Still, Caesar knows the situation is temporary. Pompey and the senatorial forces have escaped, carrying the Republic's old authority with them. And so, after stabilizing the city, Caesar leaves once more, this time not as a rebel crossing a forbidden river, but as Rome's chosen leader pursuing a rival across the Mediterranean. The civil war drifts across landscapes as varied as the moods of a restless sea, the cold plains of Spain, the wide harbors of Greece, the rolling deserts of North Africa. Wherever Caesar travels, the world seems to hold its breath, as if observing two visions of Rome clashing like tides. At Pharsalus, under a haze of dust and sun, Caesar's smaller, exhausted army defeats Pompey's larger force. The battle itself, swift, decisive, almost unreal, melts into the landscape like a fading dream. When the dust settles, the Republic's balance of power has shifted irrevocably. Pompey flees across the sea. Caesar follows with quiet determination, though not hatred. When Pompey dies in Egypt, murdered by men hoping to please their new visitor, Caesar reportedly weeps, a calm, almost private grief. He had pursued Pompey as an opponent, not as prey. Their rivalry, shaped by years of cooperation and pride, ends not with triumph, but with a sense of something ancient slipping away. A generation of Roman leadership has dissolved into the sand. In Alexandria, Caesar becomes entangled in dynastic struggles, guiding events with a blend of intelligence and patience. He supports Cleopatra, not with sudden passion, but with the measured understanding that Egypt, too, is a piece of the Mediterranean's shifting puzzle. Nights along the Nile move slowly, filled with warm breezes, lantern-lit chambers, and whispered political calculations. By the time Caesar returns to Rome, the world has changed. The civil wars have thinned the ranks of the Senate. Power has concentrated naturally around the figure who restored order with the least cruelty. Caesar is appointed dictator, at first temporarily, then for longer terms, and finally for life. His authority is vast, though he exercises it with an unusual softness. He pardons enemies, He reforms laws. He restructures debts. He rebuilds temples and calendars. He opens public offices to men once excluded. For the people of Rome, artisans, merchants, farmers, freedmen, Caesar feels like a breath of stability after years of uncertainty. Crowds gather wherever he walks. His presence seems to warm public spaces, filling them with a hum of hopeful conversation. Bread flows more steadily. Games return. Roads are repaired. The city, long wearied by disorder, begins to exhale. Yet among the Senate, the calm has a different flavor. His decisions, though practical, feel heavy. His reforms, though beneficial, overshadow the old traditions. Senators sit beneath colonnades whispering about precedents being broken, about boundaries fading, about the republic's pillars bending, then bending further. Some fear that Caesar's pardon, so generous, so absolute, is not kindness, but a signal of confidence too great to challenge. Others fear something more subtle, that the people love him more than they love the republic itself. In the Curia, where marble columns catch the glow of afternoon light, seasoned statesmen shift uneasily in their seats. They notice how easily Caesar speaks in assemblies, how crowds lean forward when he raises a hand, how soldiers greet him, even outside military contexts, with the warm familiarity of a father to whom they owe their lives. They notice, too, the faint silhouette of a crown in every rumor that drifts across the forum. Caesar, for his part, never openly claims kingship. He dismisses such offers, sometimes theatrically, sometimes with a polished humility, but the whispers persist, carried on the warm Mediterranean winds, settling into the ears of men raised to fear monarchy more than death itself. Even Caesar's displays of humility are interpreted through conflicting lenses. When he walks through Rome in simple clothing, some see modesty, others see strategy. When he pardons former enemies, some see mercy, others see the quiet elimination of opposition through gratitude and obligation. Every gesture becomes a message. Every silence becomes a statement. Every step echoes in chambers already uneasy with his presence. You can almost feel the tension gathering beneath the city's calm surface, like water swirling quietly beneath the marble floors of the Senate. Rome is peaceful, prosperous, and increasingly singular in its source of authority, and for a republic that defined itself through shared power, shared offices, and shared burdens, this singularity feels less like relief and more like a slow unraveling. Tonight, as you drift through the dimly lit corridors of Caesar's late career, imagine him seated at a long wooden desk, reviewing reforms under the soft glow of lamplight. He is older now, lines gathering gently around his eyes, his mind sharper than ever. Outside, Rome hums with new confidence, unaware that its fragile political structure is bending toward its final threshold. Caesar has achieved everything he once imagined, but his success, brilliant and serene, is beginning to cast shadows long enough for others to fear. Shadows that soon will gather, whisper, and sharpen into intention. Part 6. The seeds of conspiracy night settles over Rome with the softness that belies the quiet unrest beginning to coil beneath its marble surfaces. Lamps glow faintly behind shuttered windows, their light trembling across courtyards scented with sage and warm stone. The city appears peaceful, almost serene, yet beneath this calm, the foundations of the old republic are beginning to shift, and the minds of certain senators drift toward thoughts they have never dared to speak aloud. Caesar, now dictator for life, walks through the forum with a sense of contemplative ease. He has restored stability to a world that felt fractured beyond repair. Grain flows steadily from the provinces. Corruption has less room to breathe. Debts are managed with gentler hands. Roads are being rebuilt. Veterans receive land. The calendar itself has been reshaped, aligning the rhythms of Roman time with the sun. To many, Caesar feels like a guiding star in an era that had nearly drowned in chaos. But for others, Especially among the old patrician families, his presence feels too large, too luminous. His power, though exercised with calm restraint, stretches across Rome like a long shadow, soft yet unmistakable. Inside the Senate, tension gathers like dust along the ridges of ancient columns. Men sit beneath the painted ceilings, watching Caesar's reforms unfold with uneasy fascination. They whisper about precedents, about ancient laws stretched beyond recognition, about honors granted to him that no Roman before had ever received. Each gesture that praises him seems to carry the weight of a stone placed quietly upon the Republic's chest. Some senators, old enough to remember Sulla's dictatorship, fear that history is beginning to echo itself, though Caesar's rule is far gentler, far more elegant than Sulla's ever was. Others fear something more personal, the loss of their own influence in a system now revolving around a single gravitational force. Among them moves Marcus Junius Brutus, thoughtful, quiet, torn. He is a man shaped by philosophy, by lineage, by expectations that stretch backward for centuries. His ancestor expelled the last king of Rome. His family history is a story of resisting tyranny, and so, even as Caesar treats him with genuine affection, even as the public sees them together, speaking softly beneath colonnades, Brutus feels a subtle fracture opening inside himself. He admires Caesar, he respects him, but the more Caesar rises, the more Brutus wonders whether admiration can coexist with duty. Nearby stands Gaius Cassius Longinus, sharp-minded, restless, watching the political atmosphere with a colder gaze. Cassius served with distinction. He is no stranger to power, but he feels overshadowed, not only by Caesar's accomplishments, but by the way the world seems to lean toward him, as a plant leans toward sunlight. Cassius feels his own relevance slipping like fine sand through open fingers. It is Cassius who first hears the whisper inside his mind. If Caesar cannot be stopped by words, perhaps he must be stopped by hands. The thought arrives softly, like a leaf settling onto water. It is not anger that moves him, but a quiet calculation shaped by fear of the Republic's future. Sometimes, the most dangerous thoughts are the ones that sound noble when spoken aloud. Conversations begin in secluded gardens, where pomegranate trees cast patterned shadows across mosaic floors. A few senators gather in small groups, speaking in voices barely above the rustle of leaves. At first, the discussions are abstract, philosophical, even wistful. They speak of the Republic's fragility, of ancient virtues fading under the weight of one man's brilliance. They speak of what Rome once was, and what it might become if Caesar remains at the center of its orbit. But slowly, these philosophical laments turn into something sharper. The idea forms not as a declaration, but as a quiet acknowledgement. Caesar will not step aside. He cannot return Rome to its old structure without unmaking everything he has built. The stability, the unity, the careful balance. His reforms tie Rome together like threads woven into new cloth. And the senators, who once guided the Republic, find themselves overshadowed by a man whose authority has grown not through force, but through competence. They fear that the Republic, already fragile, may never again stand on its own legs, and so Cassius begins to gather others, not men hungry for power, for Caesar's popularity is too immense to replace easily, but men who fear that power itself is becoming concentrated in a way no law can restrain. He speaks softly, persuasively, beneath open skies and within lamplit rooms, his words drifting like small seeds across a field of uncertainty. Those who listen feel a subtle tightening in their chests. It is not hatred, it is not vengeance, it is something quieter, more unsettling, a sense of responsibility, or perhaps the illusion of it. They tell themselves they are acting for Rome, for tradition, for the generations yet unborn. Brutus resists at first. His heart does not bend easily toward violence. He walks along the Tiber at dusk, listening to the water ripple against its banks, trying to reconcile loyalty to Caesar with loyalty to Rome. But the whispers continue. Letters appear. Philosophers speak to him in private about duty, virtue, destiny. The city, meanwhile, goes about its days with gentle normalcy. Bakers knead dough before sunrise. Children chase one another through sunlit alleys. Merchants haggle beneath awnings smelling of olive oil and citrus. Above them, the Senate's quiet conspiracy grows like a vine, climbing an unsuspecting wall. Caesar notices nothing unusual. He trusts too easily, perhaps, or believes too firmly in the strength of his own pardons. He is generous, forgiving, and confident, qualities that soothe the public and unsettle the elite. When he walks through the forum, citizens greet him warmly, veterans salute with pride, scholars approach him with petitions, and senators bow with carefully measured expressions. They hide their intentions beneath layers of ceremony and polished marble. Yet even without knowing the details, Caesar senses a subtle change in the air, a faint coolness beneath the warmth of public devotion. He feels the Senate pull back slightly, like a friend suddenly remembering an old grievance. But he is tired of war, tired of division. He chooses to focus on rebuilding, not on detecting shadows. Perhaps he imagines that gratitude is stronger than fear. Perhaps he believes Rome is ready to accept a single, benevolent guiding hand. Perhaps he simply does not wish to imagine betrayal in the faces of men he once embraced as allies. Tonight, as you drift through the quiet rooms where these conspirators gather, imagine the sound of distant footsteps echoing across mosaic floors. Imagine lamps burning low, their flames trembling in the draft of an open doorway. Imagine a group of senators seated in a semicircle, their garments whispering as they shift, each man wondering whether history will judge them as saviors or villains. The seeds have been planted, gently, thoughtfully, almost reluctantly. But seeds, once planted, do not wait for permission to grow. Soon, intentions will take form. Soon, Rome will hold its breath. And Caesar, walking calmly through the city he reshaped, will move unknowingly toward the moment when these quiet seeds finally break the surface. Part 7. The shadows beneath the marble. Rome in these years carried a gentler face in the daylight, yet the calm that lay across its streets like a warm veil was not the calm of contentment, but the calm of a city that had grown accustomed to living with unresolved tremors beneath its foundations. In the mornings, sunlight slipped through the colonnades of temples and poured softly across the marble floors of the forum, where merchants called to one another in familiar voices, and magistrates reviewed documents with the steady rhythm of men convinced that routine can anchor a restless world. But beneath these ordinary sounds, deeper currents were forming quietly inside the Senate, where seasoned statesmen felt the delicate balance of the Republic shifting in ways that words alone could not repair. Caesar, moving through this landscape with the ease of someone who believed his presence brought stability, had grown into a figure whose very calmness seemed to unsettle those who feared the concentration of power. He pardoned old enemies with a generosity that astonished some and alarmed others, reshaped political offices with the clarity of a man convinced he understood Rome better than the systems designed to govern it, and walked through public spaces surrounded not by guards, but by crowds eager to see him, to hear his voice, to feel that Rome had finally entered a period of predictable order. Yet in the Senate's private chambers where conversations flowed in softer tones, this same predictability felt like a warning, because when stability depends on one man, the structure supporting it begins to lose the ability to stand on its own. It was in these quieter hours, often after sunset, when oil lamps glowed against frescoed walls, that small groups of senators met in one another's houses. They did not gather with the urgency of conspirators convinced of their righteousness. Rather, they appeared like men circling a question they were afraid to ask directly, letting the air fill with cautious phrasing and half-finished thoughts. Cassius, whose sharpness lent shape to these meetings, often guided the discussions with a subtle firmness, weaving together concerns about Caesar's swelling authority, the honors that seemed to elevate him beyond the reach of ordinary institutions, and the growing suspicion that Rome was drifting towards something resembling kingship, even as Caesar himself rejected the title in public ceremonies. Each man listened with the posture of someone trying to decide whether his unease came from genuine patriotism or from a quieter fear that his own influence within the Republic was dissolving. Brutus's involvement added a weight that none of the others could ignore. His family line, stretching back to the earliest struggles that defined Roman identity, carried symbolic power, and although he hesitated more openly than the rest, the very sight of him contemplating the dilemma seemed to give the discussions a legitimacy that made the others stand straighter. Brutus admired Caesar and owed him gratitude, yet he also carried an internal code, shaped by the stories told in his household, stories of ancestors who had defended the Republic not by serving authority, but by limiting it. In his long reflective silences, the others sensed both the fragility of his loyalty to Caesar and the depth of his loyalty to the ideals that predated them both. These gatherings were not dramatic scenes filled with sudden revelations. They were slow-burning conversations in shaded courtyards and quiet atria where the scent of wax and crushed laurel leaves drifted through the air. A few senators would sit around a low table, speaking in subdued voices about recent decrees, public ceremonies, and the increasing reverence shown to Caesar in words, statues, and rituals. They spoke of the danger of letting one man's judgment outweigh the collective wisdom of institutions that had guided Rome for centuries, even if those institutions had faltered in recent times. Some wondered whether Caesar even realized how thoroughly his presence overshadowed the Senate's authority, or whether he believed that Rome could no longer afford the luxury of shared governance. These questions, posed softly and without anger, spread from one mind to another, like a thin thread connecting men who might otherwise have disagreed about almost everything. Outside these private rooms, the city continued moving with its familiar rhythm. The ordinary citizens, far removed from the subtleties of constitutional anxiety, saw Caesar not as a threat to liberty, but as a source of stability after the chaos of civil war. Markets reopened reliably, grain arrived on time, festivals resumed without fear of riots, and once fractured neighborhoods felt safer than they had in decades. Yet this very stability contributed to the Senate's unease, because the more the people depended on Caesar, the less they depended on the Senate. The Republic was built on the idea that no single individual could embody Rome, yet the crowds cheering Caesar's name each morning suggested that this idea was already fading. As weeks passed, the conversations in these private meetings shifted gradually from abstract concern to structured intention. Questions that had once been hypothetical now began to anchor themselves in practical considerations. Who might participate? Where an act could be carried out? Whether one moment in the Senate could restore the balance they believed had been lost. Cassius spoke with a clarity that made the room feel heavier, outlining not just the reasons for action, but the consequences of inaction. A Rome where Caesar's authority, however benevolent, would eventually solidify into a form that no rule or custom could limit. Some senators nodded reluctantly, others pressed their lips together in thought, and still others stared into the lamplight as though searching for a sign that history would one day absolve them. Brutus's eventual agreement did not arrive with dramatic declarations. It emerged through the quiet erosion of his internal resistance. He would walk alone at dusk along the Tiber, watching the reflections of buildings ripple across the water, and feel the weight of competing loyalties shifting inside him. He understood Caesar's intentions were not cruel. He understood the affection Caesar held for him, but he also understood the symbolic power of his own role in Rome's future, and the pressure exerted upon him by those who insisted the Republic needed a defender whose name carried ancient authority. When he finally lent his presence fully to the planning, the others felt the final thread click into place. Meanwhile, Caesar sensed only hints of distant tension, small changes in tone or posture among senators who once greeted him more warmly. But he had grown accustomed to envy and rivalry, and interpreted these subtleties not as threats, but as background noise in a city that had always been divided. He continued his work with a mixture of energy and weariness, refining policies, reviewing proposals, and considering the military campaigns he hoped would define the next chapter of Rome's expansion. His mind was fixed on the world ahead, not on the shifting expressions of men who smiled and bowed while concealing fears they rarely named aloud. Thus, the conspiracy grew not like a lightning strike, sudden and violent, but like ivy along a courtyard wall, creeping, branching, strengthening quietly until its presence became structural. Each man involved felt both burdened and justified, caught between admiration for Caesar, audacious achievements, and dread of the future they imagined, in which one man's brilliance eclipsed the entire republic. By the time they realized how far the plan had advanced, it no longer felt like a choice, but a trajectory, a slow and measured movement toward an outcome they believed, perhaps mistakenly, that history demanded of them. Rome slept each night unaware of these undercurrents, lulled by the familiar hush of distant fountains and the soft glow of lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. Yet within the Senate's private spaces, where shadows gathered at the edges of lamplight, the idea that Caesar must be removed had taken firm root. It did not yet have a date, or a final shape, or the desperate sharpness it would later acquire, but it lived now within them, quietly altering the way they looked at Caesar each morning, the way they greeted him, the way they measured every decision. The Republic felt fragile in their imaginations, and fragility often breeds resolve. And so, with no fanfare, no sudden turning point, no dramatic confrontation, the conspiracy deepened. Caesar continued to walk through the forum, speaking warmly to citizens, unaware that behind polite smiles and respectful bows, a collective intention was gathering weight. The senators continued to debate public matters by day, while calculating private purpose by night. And Rome continued to drift forward, carried by the same warm breezes and rhythmic footsteps, toward a moment when the balance between past and future would tilt irreversibly. Part 8. The Last Night. Night falls over Rome with a softness that feels almost protective, as though the city, heavy with unspoken intentions, needs one final evening of quiet before the world tilts. The lamps along the forum flicker in the rising breeze, casting long amber shadows across pavements worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air smells faintly of rain, though the clouds hold their tears. And somewhere in this vast, pulsating city, Julius Caesar prepares for what should have been an ordinary day. But it will not be ordinary. Nothing about the hours ahead belongs to the rhythm of normal life. For now, though, everything seems calm. Caesar spends the early part of the evening reviewing petitions and documents at home. The room is warmly lit, its walls adorned with subdued frescoes of vines and distant landscapes. A jug of watered wine rests beside him on a small table. His handwriting moves steadily across parchment, though his focus drifts at times, as though some unease at the edge of awareness is tugging gently at him. He is tired, more tired than he admits. The years of campaigning, governing, negotiating, and reforming have left a weight on his shoulders that no triumph can fully lift. Yet he looks forward to the future with a strange mixture of confidence and urgency. He has plans for Parthia, plans for rebuilding, plans for reshaping governance so that Rome's vastness becomes manageable for future generations. In his mind, he stands at the beginning of a long new chapter. Outside, meanwhile, Rome hums with subtle tension. In small houses tucked behind narrow streets, senators gather in whispers. They sit beneath low ceilings, the lamplight trembling across their faces. Some look pale, as if the weight of their decision presses heavily against their chests. Others appear almost serene, convinced they are acting to preserve something sacred. They discuss the final details. Who will stand where? Which moment to seize? Which gesture will signal the beginning? They do not speak Caesar's name loudly. It hangs between them like a shared burden. Back in Caesar's house, the sound of footsteps softens as servants retire for the night. The air cools, drifting through open windows where curtains sway gently like breath. Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, enters the room, her expression marked by worry. She speaks softly, telling him of dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams that clung to her mind long after waking. She describes seeing his statue spilling with blood, seeing him lying wounded in her arms, the sound of distant cries rising like wind through the city. Romans take dreams seriously. They are not simply visions of the mind, but messages carried across the thin boundary between earthly experience and divine intention. Caesar listens, but he listens like a man accustomed to fear, accustomed to warnings, accustomed to the constant hum of risk that has accompanied him since youth. He reassures her gently, brushing aside the ill omens with a calmness that is both affectionate and dismissive. He has received many warnings in his life, priests, soothsayers, rivals, and each time he has emerged stronger. He believes, perhaps, that destiny protects those who walk purposefully toward it. Calpurnia is not convinced. Her voice trembles as she pleads with him to stay home the next day, to postpone his meeting with the Senate. The look in her eyes carries years of shared life, the dangers, the triumphs, the narrow escapes. She knows the fragility of power, the brutality of politics, and she knows, in her bones, that something dark is reaching toward her husband. Caesar hesitates, a rare flicker of uncertainty. For a moment, the hum of distant Rome fades. The lamps burn lower. The air grows still. He agrees to stay home, but night has a way of reshaping decisions. Beyond their household walls, the conspirators do not sleep easily. Some lie awake, staring at ceilings painted with fading mythologies. Others pace quietly across their courtyards, their sandals whispering against the stone. They feel the weight of the approaching day pressing down on them like an invisible cloak. Brutus sits alone for a long time, the lamplight softening the lines of his thoughtful face. He feels the pull of contradiction, affection for Caesar, and duty to what he believes Rome should remain. His emotions move like tides, swelling and receding. He knows the coming day will mark him forever. Cassius, by contrast, feels a sharper resolve. He walks to his window, looking out at the faint outlines of rooftops against the night sky. The moonlight glints on his armor, hung neatly nearby. He closes his eyes, steadying his breath. Conviction settles around him like iron. Sleep, when it comes, is thin and restless for all. Morning begins not with sunlight, but with a restless grayness hanging over Rome. The city stirs slowly, its sounds muted as though wrapped in cloth. Caesar wakes before dawn, the echo of Calpurnia's dream still lingering in the room. He rises quietly, moving through the house with measured steps. The priests arrive bearing signs and omens. Their expressions are troubled. The sacrifices reveal unfavorable readings, organs misshapen, patterns that suggest caution. The soothsayer, Spurina, who once warned him to beware the Ides of March, appears again with the same haunting concern. Once more, Caesar hesitates. The air in the house feels heavy, as though holding its breath. Calpurnia begs him again to stay. Even some of his servants whisper entreaties, noting the unusual darkness of the morning clouds. And for a moment, he agrees. He sends word that he will not attend the Senate, but destiny seldom accepts postponement. A man arrives, Decimus Brutus, a loyal follower, a trusted confidant, and secretly a conspirator. His expression is calm, almost pleading. He tells Caesar that the Senate plans to honor him that day, that many await him eagerly, that canceling would stir suspicion and disappointment. He frames the decision as one of courage, not risk. His voice is gentle, persuasive. Caesar listens, and the quiet strength within him stirs once more. He does not want to appear fearful. He does not want the Senate to think he yields to superstition. He does not want to disappoint those who look to him for leadership, and so, slowly, the decision shifts again. He orders his litter prepared. Calpurnia watches with a silent dread, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sleeve. Caesar steps into the soft morning air, unaware that each movement carries him closer to a chamber where whispers will turn into action, where trust will dissolve beneath marble arches, where the future of Rome will pivot on moments measured in breaths. The streets are calm, the breeze is cool, the path ahead feels harmless, but the city knows, history knows, only Caesar does not. Tonight, as you drift with him through these early hours of the Ides of March, imagine the stillness of Rome around him, the faint echo of sandals on stone, the soft creak of the litter's frame. It is the last morning of a life carved from brilliance, ambition, mercy, and fragility. The day has begun, and the shadows beneath the marble are ready. Part 9. The slow walk toward fate. Morning unfolds over Rome with a pale, washed-out light, as though the sun itself hesitates to rise fully on this troubled day. A thin mist lingers between the columns of temples, softening their outlines, and the air carries a faint chill, the kind that brushes lightly against the skin before fading into warmth. The city is stirring, not with the loud clamor of festivals or markets, but with the subdued rhythm of an ordinary Roman morning. Only it is not ordinary, not beneath the surface, not for those who watch from shaded thresholds as Julius Caesar's litter begins its slow journey toward the theater of Pompey, where the Senate has convened for the day. The street stones gleam faintly with moisture. The litter bearers move in a steady, practiced rhythm, their footsteps tapping softly against the ground. Caesar sits inside, the curtains partially drawn back, allowing a thin stream of daylight to fall across his face. His expression is thoughtful, almost serene. There is no sign that he senses what waits for him beyond the turning of these narrow streets. From the surrounding houses, vendors and passers-by offer simple greetings as he passes. They bow their heads, murmur blessings, or simply watch in quiet reverence. To them, Caesar is the man who soothed famine, ended wars, restored order, and brought a measure of predictability back into their daily lives. Their gratitude hangs in the air like incense, subtle yet unmistakable. Caesar nods gently in return. He does not see, or perhaps chooses not to see, the faint tension in the faces of those who follow at a distance. Senators who walk in measured steps, each man rehearsing in his mind the moment to come. Their togas shift with every movement, the folds concealing blades hidden beneath cloth. Their hearts move between two beats, fear and resolve. You can almost feel the heaviness of their breaths as they walk behind him, like shadows unwilling to detach from the body they follow. Inside the litter, Caesar's thoughts drift. Perhaps he recalls the omens of the morning, the warnings from priests, the anxious voice of Calpurnia, the trembling of her dream. Perhaps he brushes them aside as remnants of superstition, the kind he has learned to rise above. He is a man shaped by action, not by fear. His mind, instead, turns toward the Senate meeting ahead. He intends to address several reforms, to discuss appointments, to prepare for his coming departure for the East. The Parthian campaign lingers in his thoughts, an opportunity not only for expansion, but for stability, for proving that Rome's strength under his guidance could reach beyond its imagined limits. The litter shifts gently as the bearers take a gradual incline. Caesar adjusts his cloak. The city's sounds swell around him, distant splashes from the Tiber, the clatter of carts, the bark of a dog echoing through an alley. Everything feels familiar, almost comforting. Rome is his home, his creation, his responsibility. He believes he is walking into another day of shaping its future. Behind him, Brutus walks with a posture so composed it might fool even himself. His hands stay neatly folded within his sleeves, though he feels the weight of the dagger hidden at his side, as if it were made of lead rather than iron. He glances toward the back of the litter, his expression unreadable. He had spent much of the night awake, pacing softly across the mosaic floors of his home. The events ahead pressed against his mind in slow, heavy waves. His ancestors seemed to whisper to him, voices of old Rome, stern and expectant. Yet another voice whispered too, quieter but more personal, the voice of friendship, of gratitude, of affection for a man who had trusted him. Now, as he walks, these voices clash inside him. The rhythm of his steps carries both tenderness and tension. Cassius, close by, watches him from the corner of his eye. Cassius's stride is firmer, sharper. His jaw is set. He senses the window of time narrowing around them. Every sound, a bird's cry, the shift of sandals, the creak of wooden beams, feels amplified, yet his resolve remains steady, wrapped in layers of belief and necessity. More conspirators join along the path, approaching from side streets, blending seamlessly into the growing procession. To an untrained observer, it looks like a gathering of dignitaries, but beneath the dignified silence lies a shared secret that pulses through their veins like a second heartbeat. The streets narrow slightly as they approach the field of Mars, where the theater of Pompey stands, a broad complex of marble, arches, and quiet alcoves. The Senate has been meeting here temporarily, while the Curia is being rebuilt. It is an ironic setting, a place named after Caesar, SS' former ally and later rival, a man whose shadow still lingers along these stone corridors. As they near the entrance, Caesar signals for the litter to stop. He steps down, his sandals touching the cool stone floor. His cloak flows gently behind him in the breeze. A few onlookers murmur in admiration. He nods politely, then turns toward the portico. For a moment, he pauses. Perhaps he feels a faint unease. Perhaps he senses a shift in the air. Perhaps he simply observes the way the morning light settles oddly across the steps. A soothsayer standing nearby murmurs a soft greeting. The same man who cautioned him weeks earlier. Caesar smiles faintly and asks, according to later stories, "Well, the Ides of March have come." The soothsayer replies, just as softly, "Aye, Caesar, but not yet gone." The words drift through the air like a thin thread of smoke. Caesar hears them, but he continues walking. Inside the theater complex, the atmosphere feels markedly different from the streets outside. The corridors are cooler. The stone floors echo lightly with each step, and the ceilings gather shadows in their corners. The air carries a faint earthy scent, old marble, old wood, old history, blending with the soft murmur of senators already assembled. Caesar moves forward with the calm dignity that marks his public presence. He believes this meeting is like any other. Debates, discussions, decisions. He does not know that the circle he is entering contains tension beneath every fold of fabric, beneath every polite greeting. The conspirators step closer. Their faces are composed, their voices polite. Their hands beneath their togas tremble slightly. The theater's inner courtyard opens before them, sunlight spilling across its tiles like a quiet blessing. Caesar walks into it slowly, steady as the morning tide. Behind him, Brutus inhales deeply, as though drawing one final moment of hesitation into his lungs. The path widens, the shadows lengthen. The senators position themselves around Caesar as if forming a casual escort. Nothing appears unusual, yet everything has changed. Tonight, as you drift into this moment of suspended breath, imagine the soft sound of Caesar's sandals brushing the stone, the cool air curling beneath the arches, the faint rustle of fabric as the circle tightens. He is walking not toward power, not toward triumph, but toward the center of a plan woven in darkness. The final steps are quiet, too quiet, and history holds its breath. Part 10. The Ides of March. The theater of Pompeii, where the Senate meets during renovations of the Curia, rests beneath the pale light of a late Roman morning, its stone colonnades cool to the touch, and its inner courtyards filled with a hush that seems deeper than usual, as though the building itself senses the burden of the hours to come. The air carries that faint mixture of dust, marble, and distant incense that clings to Rome's most ancient structures, and when Caesar steps inside, his footsteps create a soft echo along the polished floors, a sound that lingers for a moment before dissolving into the stillness around him. Nothing in his demeanor suggests apprehension. He walks with the same calm confidence he has shown for years, the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to solving problems with clarity and purpose, unaware that, on this day, the problem forming around him is not an external challenge, but a circle of familiar faces wearing masks of ceremony. As he enters the great chamber, senators rise in greeting, and the rustle of their togas creates a gentle wave of sound across the semicircle. This rustle, so ordinary on most days, carries a different weight today, for beneath the folds of fabric lie small blades wrapped in cloth, hidden by hands that tremble only slightly. Yet nothing appears unusual. Men approach him with respectful bows, with carefully measured smiles, with greetings spoken in tones that disguise the tension humming quietly within their chests. The choreography of Roman politics continues as though nothing has changed, though everything has already changed in the minds of the men who stand closest to him. Caesar makes his way toward his seat, positioned prominently as a mark of honor, and for a moment he pauses to adjust his cloak. The light filtering through the upper windows creates a soft halo around the dust suspended in the air, and it is within this faint glow that his gaze sweeps across the room, not suspiciously, but with the warmth of someone who has long believed that reconciliation and pardon can mend even the deepest fractures. He has offered mercy to nearly every man present, forgiven debts, restored positions, rebuilt the careers of those who once stood against him. And the idea that these same men might harbor deadly intentions does not settle easily into his mind, because his political worldview is built on the belief that generosity creates loyalty, and that Rome finally at peace has no appetite for further bloodshed. The senators close in gently, not in sudden motion, but in the quiet, almost ritualistic way that experienced statesmen gather before requesting a favor or presenting a petition. Julius Caesar, chosen to approach first, steps forward with a respectful gesture, his voice steady as he speaks of his wish for his brother's exile to be reversed. Caesar listens patiently, his expression thoughtful, and in that brief moment, the room becomes a delicate balance of stillness and intention, each man waiting for the next gesture to unfold. When Caesar begins to respond, offering a measured answer that aligns with his sense of order and moderation, Caesar reaches toward him, not violently, but with the pretext of adjusting Caesar's toga, as though seeking closer attention. It is this action, subtle and almost ceremonial, that signals the others. The chamber does not erupt. Instead, it shifts in a slow, disquieting ripple, like a canvas stirred by an unseen wind. Men who moments earlier carried the posture of loyal advisors now move with a strange, rehearsed confidence, their motions carefully controlled, their faces tightened, not with hatred, but with the grim resolve of individuals who have convinced themselves that they are preserving something ancient and sacred. Caesar, taken by surprise, reacts not with fear, but with confusion, his voice rising only slightly as he questions the impropriety of such disorder during a senatorial gathering. The space around him folds inward, senators forming a loose ring that seems at first like a crowd seeking to speak, but quickly becomes something more structured, more deliberate. In this moment, the event that history will simplify into a series of quick motions actually unfolds with unsettling slowness in the minds of those present. Caesar's eyes move from one face to another, recognizing each man, registering expressions that waver between determination and sorrow. He sees Cassius's tightened jaw, Casca's strained composure, Decimus's forced steadiness, and then, most painfully, Brutus, whose presence in this circle carries a weight far heavier than any blade. The shock etched across Caesar's features is not the shock of injury, but the shock of understanding, the realization that the republic he tried to stabilize, the men he tried to reconcile, the friendships he assumed were anchored in gratitude have all converged into a single moment that he had never truly imagined could come to pass. The room's atmosphere thickens, not with sound, but with the shared recognition that the boundary between past and future has just been crossed. The senators' motions blur together, their garments shifting, their breath quickening, their hands trembling as intention solidifies into action. And yet, from a distance, the scene would appear strangely quiet, almost ceremonial, like a tragedy performed in muted tones rather than violent ones. Caesar, surrounded by men he once elevated, remains upright longer than stories later suggest, his gaze searching faces not for mercy but for explanation, as though he wishes to understand the logic behind this act before surrendering to it. When Brutus steps forward, the chamber seems to hold a breath that no one exhales. Caesar's expression softens, not in forgiveness, not in anger, but in a sorrow that belongs more to disappointment than betrayal. Whatever words pass between them, whether spoken or merely carried on, the gaze they share, the meaning, is clear. This moment marks the unraveling of a bond rooted in affection and political trust, a bond Brutus believed he must sever to save the Republic, even as it tears something within him as well. The senators, having completed the deed they believed necessary, step back with the disorientation of men who have crossed an invisible threshold they cannot return from. The chamber feels suddenly larger, the light harsher, the silence deeper. Caesar's form rests at the base of the statue of Pompey, an irony not lost on those who knew the tangled history between the two great men, and the symbolism of this location settles heavily upon the conspirators, who feel the weight of what they have done settle into their bones. In the quiet aftermath, the senators look at one another, not with triumph, but with a kind of bewildered exhaustion. They had imagined this act would feel righteous, cleansing, restorative. Instead, it surrounds them with a silence so complete that it seems to press against their ears. Outside, Rome continues its mourning, as though nothing unusual has occurred. Children chasing one another through alleys, merchants opening their stalls, bakers shaping dough, unaware that inside this marble chamber, the world they believed they knew has just shifted irrevocably. For now, the building remains still, holding tightly the echo of a single moment in which a man who shaped Rome's destiny met the consequences of fears he never fully acknowledged. And the senators, having acted in the name of the Republic, begin to understand that preserving a system is far more complicated than removing a man, especially when that man had come to embody the hopes of a city longing for order. Part 11. A Republic without breath. For a long moment after Caesar falls, the Senate chamber does not feel like a place of politics or law at all. It feels like a room that has forgotten how to breathe. The air hangs thick between the columns and over the marble floor, carrying the metallic tang of fear and the faint residue of incense from earlier rituals. The men who only hours before walked into this space as statesmen robed in the dignity of their offices, now stand as if awakening from an uneasy dream, their hands still resting awkwardly at their sides, their eyes fixed on the figure that has come to rest at the base of Pompey's statue. No speeches follow, no declarations ring out, no immediate sense of triumph settles over them. Instead, there is a heavy, almost oppressive silence that presses inward and makes every small noise. The creak of a sandal, the rustle of a toga, sounds strangely loud. Some of the conspirators look at Caesar's body with a kind of stunned detachment, as if struggling to connect the act they had rehearsed so carefully in their minds with the reality lying before them. Others cannot look directly at him at all, their gaze darting toward the exits, toward the windows, toward any direction that does not confront them with the result of what they have done. Even Cassius, who had for so long provided the sharp logic and relentless argument behind their scheme, feels the difference between an idea of justice and its physical consequence. Brutus, marked by the symbolic centrality his name carries, stands caught between his role as one of the leaders and his deeper awareness that something irreversible has just occurred, not only to Caesar, but to the republic he believed he was defending. They had told themselves, in lamplit rooms and shaded gardens, that this act would save Rome, that by removing one man they would release the republic from an invisible tightening around its throat. They imagined that when it was done, the city would feel lighter, that the Senate would stand taller, that liberty would rush back in like fresh air through an open window. Yet the immediate sensation is not liberty, but vacuum. The room feels emptied of something more than a person. It feels emptied of direction. For years, even his opponents had grown accustomed to Caesar being the axis around which events turned, whether they agreed with him or not. Now that center has disappeared in an instant, and what remains is a fragile ring of men uncertain how to fill the void. Gradually, they begin to move. One by one, and then in small clusters, the conspirators step toward the exits, their sandals tapping unevenly against the marble as they cross the chamber. Some still clutch their daggers, as if unsure where to put them, as if setting them down would make the act feel too final. Others wipe their hands on their garments, not to remove visible stains, but as a reflexive gesture born from the discomfort of what cannot be washed away. They had planned to proclaim their motives publicly, to step into the forum as liberators, to tell the people that Rome had been freed from the danger of kingship. Yet, as they file out of the hall, the words they had rehearsed feel thinner and less certain than they did in the safety of whispered meetings. Outside, the news does not spread at once with the speed of a shouted proclamation. It moves in ripples, carried by frightened witnesses, by servants hurrying from the complex, by senators whose pale faces betray more than their controlled voices reveal. At first, the people of Rome do not understand. Rumors collide and tangle in the streets. Some say Caesar is wounded, others that he has collapsed from illness, others still that the gods have struck him down in anger. Only after a little time does the truth begin to crystallize. Julius Caesar, the man who had guided Rome through civil war and reshaped its governance, has been killed inside a Senate meeting by a group of senators who claim to have acted on behalf of the Republic. The city's first response is not celebration and not organized revolt. It is confusion. Market stalls hover between opening and closing as merchants peer toward the center of the city, trying to judge what the day will bring. Parents call their children indoors. Conversations at doorways fall into uneasy silence when someone approaches. The normal rhythm of Rome falters. People remember that the last time power shifted by force, it brought armies to the streets and battle standards to the gates. They wonder whether this act will invite more bloodshed, whether Caesar's supporters will retaliate, whether new civil wars are already beginning in the shadows. The conspirators, for their part, attempt to step into the role they had envisioned for themselves. They move through the city in a group, their garments still unsettled from the struggle, trying to project an image of unity and purpose. Some accounts will later say they lifted their bloody hands as a sign to the crowd, presenting themselves as men who have done a hard but necessary deed. Whether this detail is exact or embellished by later retellings, the emotional truth remains. They wished to be seen as liberators, as guardians of tradition, as those who had acted on behalf of a republic that could not defend itself from the encroachment of singular power. But the people do not rush to embrace them. Many Romans had come to rely on Caesar for food distributions, debt relief, stability, and the promise of future reforms. To these citizens, the Senate was not the familiar guardian of their daily lives. It was a distant institution filled with men whose quarrels had often plunged the city into crisis. The conspirators claim that they have preserved liberty by killing a potential tyrant does not match the reality of what many Romans have experienced. To a butcher, a baker, a laborer, Caesar was not an oppressor. He was the figure under whose rule their world had become less chaotic. In the hours that follow, the city seems to hold itself in suspension. The conspirators gather in the Capitol, that ancient height crowned by temples and memories of Rome's earliest struggles, believing that this place, sanctified by tradition, will give their act moral weight. They send messages, they prepare speeches, they hope for support from other magistrates, from old families, from anyone who still believes that the Republic en legitimacy resides in shared authority rather than in a single guiding hand. Some voices, especially among the aristocratic class, echo their sentiments, speaking in lofty language about liberty and the expulsion of kings, about the need to restore checks and balances that Caesar's power had unintentionally eroded. Yet somewhere nearby, in the quiet of his own thoughts, Mark Antony considers his position. He had not been part of the conspiracy. He had, in many ways, benefited from Caesar's rise, holding office under his protection and sharing in his campaigns. When the news reaches him, his reaction blends genuine shock with swift calculation. He understands, perhaps more quickly than the conspirators themselves, that every act of political violence creates a new battlefield. Removing Caesar has not restored the old republic. It has simply created a vacuum that must, inevitably, be filled. Antony moves with care. Outwardly, he adopts a posture of caution, neither rushing to retaliate nor openly aligning himself with the conspirators. He sends messages, seeks alliances, and gauges the mood of the people. Beneath his measured surface, however, thoughts gather with the decisiveness of a man who has seen battle and knows that the side that controls the narrative often controls the outcome. He recognizes that Caesar's memory, if handled properly, could become a powerful force in itself, uniting those who loved him into a political strength the conspirators have failed to anticipate. As the day wanes, the body of Caesar is eventually taken from the place where he fell. The Senate chamber, once the heart of the Republic's deliberations, feels strangely hollow. The statue of Pompey stands above the space where Caesar's blood has stained the floor, a layered symbol of Rome's long rivalries and fragile alliances. The building bears witness to the moment when the Senate tried to reclaim its old authority by resorting to the very kind of irreversible act that had so often shattered the Republic. Trust in itself. Rome does not erupt immediately into open conflict, but the equilibrium that follows is an uneasy one. The conspirators do not find themselves hailed as saviors in the way they might have hoped. Instead, they begin to feel the slow creep of isolation, as many senators, magistrates, and ordinary citizens wait to see which way the wind will blow. The question that began in private rooms, whether Caesar's death would save the Republic or destroy it, now leaves those rooms and begins to swirl across the entire city, asked in whispers over shared loaves of bread in doorways at dusk, in guarded conversations between friends who are no longer sure they trust one another's loyalties. In these first hours and days after the assassination, the Republic resembles a body that has received a shock so great that, for a brief moment, its pulse seems to disappear. It is not yet clear whether it will regain its rhythm or fall into a new, different kind of stillness. The conspirators had imagined that by striking at Caesar, they were striking at the root of monarchy and restoring an old balance. But what they have truly done is to sever Rome from the one figure who, for better or for worse, had managed to hold its fraying strands together. What replaces him will not be the old republic reborn in pure form. It will be something new, born from grief, fear, and the scramble to control the future. As night returns to the city, the lamps along the streets are lit one by one, sending small pools of light out into the darkness. Behind shuttered windows, Roman families speak in low tones, trying to decide whether the day's events mean safety or danger for them. On the hills, the conspirators huddle together, bound now not only by their vision of the Republic, but by the shared knowledge that there is no path back to the world before the Ides of March. And somewhere between them, in the minds of those watching and waiting, a thought slowly begins to form. Killing Caesar may have ended one kind of power, but it has also released forces that no man, and perhaps no senate, will be able to fully control again. Part 12. The funeral that set the world on fire. The days following Caesar's death move through Rome with a strange, heavy slowness, as if time itself is unsure how to proceed without the steady momentum that his presence once provided. The city's streets fill not with chaos, as the conspirators feared, but with a kind of suspended bewilderment. Market stalls open and close unevenly. Families cluster in doorways, whispering updates gathered from neighbors and travelers. Everywhere, there is a question trembling beneath the surface. What does Rome become now that the man who held its conflicting pieces together has been removed? For several days, Caesar's body rests in his home, tended by those who remained loyal to him, while the Senate debates how he should be honored. The conspirators prefer a quiet, understated funeral, something solemn but controlled, without the theatrics that could inflame public sentiment. They hope that by granting Caesar respectful rites, they will show the city that they acted not out of hatred, but necessity. Yet even in these early deliberations, they sense that the narrative is slipping from their grasp. Too many citizens remember the stability Caesar brought. Too many recall the famine that eased under his administration, the debts restructured, the veterans settled, the sense that Rome, after years of drifting, had a direction again. Mark Antony understands this tension with a clarity honed by instinct and ambition. He speaks with caution at first, agreeing outwardly to the terms of the funeral, while quietly positioning himself as Caesar's most visible heir in spirit, if not in blood. His demeanor is controlled, but beneath it lies an alertness that does not miss a single tremor in the city's mood. He sees the conspirators distancing themselves from the people, sees their attempts to justify the assassination in lofty language about liberty and tyranny, and recognizes that such arguments no longer resonate with a populace that has lived through the instability of civil war. Thus, the funeral becomes not merely a ritual, but a turning point. On the appointed day, crowds gather early in the forum, filling the open space until the movement of bodies creates a low, constant hum. Many arrive wearing plain garments as a sign of mourning. Others bring small sprigs of laurel or olive. Still others come simply to witness what they sense will be a moment that changes everything. The air is warm and slightly dusty, carrying the faint smell of smoke from incense burners set near the rostra, where Antony will soon speak. Caesar's body, displayed in a wax effigy shaped to resemble him as he appeared in life, lies upon a raised platform. The artists have sculpted the image with careful detail, the calm lines of his face, the folds of his garment, the symbols of office resting beside him. It is not a lifeless representation, but a gentle echo, reminding viewers of the man who walked among them, only days earlier. When the crowd sees it, a low murmur moves through the forum, not sharp or angry, but filled with sorrow. Ordinary Romans had expected Caesar to lead them into the next phase of the Republic. Now they stare at a figure that embodies both memory and loss. Antony steps forward to address them. He does not begin with anger. His voice, steady and resonant, carries the controlled rhythm of a man who understands that persuasion begins not by stirring emotion, but by acknowledging truth. He praises Caesar's military achievements, his generosity, his reforms, his refusal of the crown when it was offered, and his efforts to protect Rome from the internal tensions that had long threatened its stability. As he speaks, the crowd listens with increasing intensity. Many nod, some weep quietly. Then, with deliberate softness, Antony shifts the tone. He does not directly condemn the conspirators. Instead, he lets the contrast between Caesar's deeds and his death grow naturally in the listeners' minds. He speaks of Caesar's will, revealing that he left gifts to the Roman people, money, gardens, public spaces, tokens of affection from a leader who, even in planning for his own absence, centered the welfare of the city. The reaction is immediate. A sigh spreads through the crowd, followed by a wave of murmuring that trembles like wind through tall grass. Antony senses the shift and deepens it. He invites the crowd to look at the effigy, to see the representation of Caesar's wounds, carefully placed by sculptors to replicate the blows described in eyewitness accounts. It is here, in this moment, that the forum's atmosphere changes from sorrowful contemplation to something more volatile. As the wax figure is slowly rotated to reveal the replicated injuries, a sound moves through the gathered masses, first a gasp, then a rising wail, then voices straining with grief and disbelief. It is not violence they see, but betrayal, not justice, but rupture, not liberation, but the silencing of a man many believed would guide Rome through the storm still gathering on its horizons. Antony does not call for revenge. He does not need to. The crowd, stirred by grief and indignation, begins to interpret the scene through its own collective emotions. Some shout that Caesar must be avenged. Others weep openly. Still others look toward the Capitol Hill where the conspirators have taken refuge, their eyes darkened with suspicion and anger. The conspirators, who had hoped that the funeral would calm the public, now watch from afar as Rome shifts beneath their feet. They see the smoke rising as some citizens, breaking from restraint, begin to burn Caesar's bier and use the embers to ignite improvised pyres around the forum. They see men shouting accusations toward them. They see women clutching their children, whispering fears about the future. And they realize, not in a single instant, but in a slow, dawning understanding, that by striking at Caesar, they did not restore the Republic. They severed Rome from the one stabilizing presence it had left. The city grows restless in the days that follow. Graffiti appears on walls condemning the assassins. Crowds gather outside the homes of certain senators, chanting for justice. Markets reopen, but with conversations that feel brittle, as though each word must be measured for fear of attracting unwanted scrutiny. The conspirators attempt speeches of justification, but the people do not hear philosophical arguments. They hear excuses. They hear the voices of men who promise liberty, yet cannot promise food or peace or the end of civil unrest. Antony, meanwhile, navigates the shifting political landscape with increasing confidence. He calls for calm even as he positions himself as Caesar's defender, aligning with the public sentiment that had begun shaping itself around loyalty to Caesar's memory. His gestures are careful, a public reading here, a well-timed meeting there, a presence that reassures without threatening, all while he waits for the next piece of the future to step onto the stage. And that piece arrives quietly, in the form of a young man named Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted heir, who will soon travel toward Rome, carrying a name powerful enough to alter everything once more. But for now, the city remains suspended in the aftermath of a funeral that has revealed a truth the conspirators never anticipated, that the republic they believed they were saving no longer exists in the hearts of the people, and that killing Caesar has not restored a lost world. It has created the conditions for a new one, shaped not by old ideals, but by the emotions now rolling through the streets of Rome like gathering storm clouds. Part 13. The Rise of the Heir. In the days after the funeral, when the shock of Caesar's death still lingers in the streets like a faint echo, and Rome drifts between unease and expectation, a new figure begins moving quietly toward the center of the unfolding story. He is young, almost startlingly so, with a manner that appears calm on the surface, yet reveals to those who watch carefully the early contours of a mind shaped for strategy. Gaius Octavius, adopted posthumously as Caesar's son, an heir receives the news of his inheritance while away from Rome, and although those around him expect hesitation or fear, he responds with a measured resolve that seems at odds with his youth. He prepares not with dramatic declarations, but with a thoughtful, deliberate steadiness, arranging his affairs, gathering loyal supporters, and traveling toward the city whose future is about to pivot around him. Rome does not yet know what to make of Octavian. Many expect him to be a quiet beneficiary of Caesar's estate, perhaps even a symbolic figure who will fade into the background while more seasoned statesmen determine the path ahead. Yet the city, unsettled by the assassination and the emotional surge of the funeral, carries within its atmosphere a sense of searching for continuity for a future that does not collapse back into the chaos Caesar once resolved, for a person who can embody the stability the conspirators failed to offer. As Octavian enters the city, walking through streets still touched by mourning, some eyes turn toward him, not out of recognition, but out of curiosity, sensing that the heir of a powerful name rarely remains an ordinary citizen. Mark Antony watches him closely. Antony had expected to inherit not only Caesar's political momentum, but also the emotional loyalty of the people, and in many ways he succeeds. Crowds respond to his speeches, veterans respect his military record, and the Senate regards him with a mixture of wariness and necessity. Yet when Octavian arrives, Antony perceives something new, an emerging competitor shaped not by age or reputation, but by legitimacy. Caesar's will has granted Octavian more than property. It has granted him identity, making him the legal continuation of Caesar's line. Even Antony, with his seasoned instincts, feels the subtle tremor this creates in the political landscape. The meeting between the two men is outwardly polite, yet quietly charged. Antony sees Octavian as inexperienced, perhaps malleable. Octavian sees in Antony a powerful figure who must be approached with care. Their early conversations move in cautious circles, filled with complimentary phrases and measured courtesies, but beneath them lies a deeper awareness that Rome, now severed from Caesar, cannot be guided by a single force alone. Each man senses that the other holds something essential. Antony claims the loyalty of soldiers and the admiration of the public. Octavian carries the weight of Caesar's name, a weight that grows heavier with every passing day. The conspirators, meanwhile, find their situation deteriorating with surprising speed. They had imagined that after the funeral, the public would calm and approval would return as people saw the assassination as a principled act. Instead, they discover that the republic they wish to restore lives largely in memory rather than in the hearts of living Romans. Many citizens do not long for a return to the old balance of power among senators. They long for the stability Caesar offered, and so the conspirators begin withdrawing from the city, seeking safety in provincial governorships or the protective walls of supportive allies. Their political speeches, once delivered with confidence, now sound hollow as the people grow more aligned with Antony and increasingly curious about Caesar as young heir. Octavian, observing this shift, begins to move with the quiet precision of someone who has studied human behavior more deeply than others assumed. He visits veterans of Caesar's legions, not with large promises, but with respectful acknowledgement of their service. He speaks to the urban poor with modesty rather than grandeur, invoking not only Caesar's memory, but his intentions for the city. He presents himself not as a replacement for Antony, nor as a rival, but as the rightful extension of Caesar's legacy, a legacy that many Romans are not ready to release. Antony attempts to limit Octavian's influence, questioning the boy's readiness for leadership, dismissing him publicly at times, and privately maneuvering to keep control over Caesar's broader political machinery. Yet Antony underestimates the quiet firmness at the core of Octavian's personality. Where Antony is charismatic and commanding, Octavian is methodical, patient, observant. He listens before acting, measures before moving, and waits for moments that allow him to advance with minimal resistance. This contrast in temperament becomes increasingly clear as Rome's uncertain future begins to draw lines between its potential leaders. Events accelerate when Octavian demands the inheritance left to him in Caesar's will. Antony, reluctant to transfer the funds and influence that accompany them, stalls. But Octavian, rather than retreating, mobilizes a legal and political campaign that surprises even seasoned observers. He recruits supporters, gathers allies among senators who mistrust Antony's ambition, and gradually builds a coalition that lacks spectacle but possesses undeniable momentum. It becomes apparent that the young heir is not content with symbolic status. He intends to shape Rome actively. Rome observes this unfolding with the fascination reserved for transformation. People remark on Octavian's composure, on the deliberate clarity of his actions, on the way he navigates the hostility of older statesmen with the patience of someone twice his age. Veterans begin nodding respectfully when he passes. Merchants mention him alongside Antony when discussing the city's future. Even senators who dismissed him initially now speak of him as an unavoidable presence in the political arena. The power struggle intensifies when Antony leaves Rome temporarily to secure territory and influence in the provinces. Octavian remains, weaving through the political vacuum with increasing confidence. He aligns himself with Caesar's supporters, gains control of key military units, and begins shaping the narrative of Rome's future as one guided not by fear or revenge, but by continuity. He does not portray himself as Caesar reborn. He presents himself as Caesar's executor, of will, of promise, of uncompleted vision. When Antony returns, he finds a Rome subtly rearranged. The Senate is no longer fully in his corner. The public listens to him, but looks also to Octavian. Veterans still respect him, yet now divide their loyalties. And so, with the tension between them threatening to fracture the fragile peace, a new solution emerges, the formation of a political alliance. The second triumvirate, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, is born not out of mutual affection, but out of necessity, a temporary merging of ambitions designed to stabilize the state and confront the conspirators who have fled to raise forces abroad. The triumvirate is legalized with sweeping powers, far more expansive than anything Caesar held, demonstrating how fully the structure of the old republic has been abandoned. Ironically, in killing Caesar to save the republic, the conspirators have accelerated the creation of a political body even more dominant than the authority they feared. As the triumvirate begins its proscriptions and campaigns, Octavian watches, learns, and waits. For now, he shares power with Antony, accepting the alliance as a step toward something larger. Antony commands armies with seasoned brilliance. Octavian commands patience with uncanny precision. And Rome, sensing the brewing storm between these two rising figures, drifts into a period where alliances feel temporary, peace feels conditional, and the Republic, once the world's most celebrated political invention, fades slowly into a memory spoken only in the speeches of those who no longer have the strength to restore it. In this twilight of old Rome, the city changes its rhythm again. Markets open earlier as people attempt to steady their lives amidst shifting power. Veterans gather in taverns, speaking with guarded optimism about Octavian's potential. Senators choose their words carefully, aware that neither Antony nor Octavian has revealed the full reach of his ambition. And in quiet moments, the people of Rome sense that they are living between eras, moving from a world shaped by Caesar's presence into a world shaped by the consequences of his absence, guided now by a young heir who watches everything with the calm gaze of someone preparing to inherit not just power, but destiny. Part 14. The World After Caesar. As the years unfold after Caesar's death, Rome drifts steadily away from the familiar outlines of the Republic it once claimed to defend, moving instead into a new and uncertain architecture of power shaped not by old institutions but by the ambitions, alliances, and rivalries of the men who inherited the space Caesar left behind. The city itself feels this transition in ways both subtle and profound. The Forum still hums with daily commerce, the Senate still convenes beneath the weight of history, and the rituals of civic life continue in their measured rhythms. Yet beneath these familiar patterns lies an awareness that Rome is no longer a state guided by the collective wisdom of magistrates, but a place where authority now concentrates around individuals who command armies, loyalty, and narrative in equal measure. The second triumvirate, formed by Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, emerges as a political body with power so sweeping that even Caesar, in the height of his influence, might have regarded them with astonishment. Their authority allows them to create laws without Senate approval, appoint magistrates, manage finances, and pursue enemies with legally sanctioned violence. To many Romans, this new structure feels less like the restoration of the old republic and more like its final dissolution, for the balance and restraint that once characterized Roman governance have been replaced by a system built upon urgency, fear, and the presumption that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary control. The proscriptions, which the triumvirs employ to secure resources and eliminate opposition, sweep through the city with a chilling regularity. Names are posted, fortunes are seized, loyalties are tested, and citizens learn once again that political upheaval often arrives not as a single dramatic event, but as a slow erosion of security that touches households far removed from the Senate's marble floors. Yet even in this atmosphere, life continues. Bakers knead dough before dawn, farmers bring produce to the markets, children play in narrow alleys between insulae. The endurance of everyday life softens the disruptions of politics, but it cannot erase the underlying truth. Rome is preparing for another conflict. The conspirators who fled Rome after the assassination gather forces in the east, where Brutus and Cassius attempt to rally the remnants of republican sentiment and forge alliances strong enough to challenge the triumvirate. Their cause, once draped in the language of liberty and ancestral values, now bears the weight of necessity, for they understand that the political world they hoped to restore vanished the moment Caesar fell. Even so, they cling to the belief that their actions can still redirect Rome's future. They march through ancient cities, raise legions, and speak of the Republic as if invoking a memory can breathe life back into a system whose foundations have already eroded. Octavian, still young, yet rapidly maturing under the pressures of leadership, watches these developments with a mixture of detachment and determination. His alliance with Antony is functional, not warm, and while both men share authority, neither trusts the other deeply. Their cooperation in the early years of the triumvirate is shaped less by mutual respect than by the shared aim of defeating the conspirators who challenge their power. On the battlefield at Philippi, the armies of Brutus and Cassius clash with the forces of Octavian and Antony, in a confrontation that brings closure to the last chapter of the Republican cause. When the Republican leaders die by their own hands, their deaths symbolize not only the end of their hopes, but the recognition that the ideals of the old Republic cannot survive the realities of a world reshaped by civil war and personal ambition. After Philippi, the alliance between Octavian and Antony, which had been threaded together by the necessity of defeating a common enemy, begins to unravel. Antony travels eastward, building alliances with Cleopatra and immersing himself in the politics of Egypt. His relationship with the queen becomes a subject of fascination and anxiety in Rome, where rumors grow faster than facts, and where Octavian, perceptive and calculating, understands how public sentiment can be shaped by careful storytelling. He begins presenting Antony not merely as a political rival, but as a man drifting away from Roman values, seduced by foreign luxury and political entanglements that threaten the city's identity. Octavian's strength lies not in battlefield charisma, but in the quiet, meticulous construction of legitimacy. He reminds the people of his connection to Caesar, invoking his adoptive father's reforms, victories, and promises. He aligns himself with veterans, rewards settlements, and presents himself as a young leader with the discipline and devotion necessary to rebuild Rome as fractured political order. Through carefully curated public gestures and an ability to sense the emotional currents of the city, he becomes the figure ordinary Romans look to for reassurance. Where Antony's presence feels distant and uncertain, Octavian's feels immediate and familiar. The tension between them eventually becomes too large to coexist within a single political structure. While Antony commands powerful forces in the east, Octavian controls the narrative in Rome, shaping the Senate weak-s decisions and presenting himself as the guardian of Roman identity against what he claims is Antony's foreign entanglement. The struggle, at first political, becomes inexorably military, and the world watches as two men, once allies, now rivals, prepare to determine the fate of the Mediterranean. The Battle of Actium, when it comes, is less a clash of ideals than the culmination of years of positioning and calculation. Octavian's forces, guided by the naval expertise of Agrippa, managed to corner and outmaneuver Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. When the dust settles and the sea grows calm again, Antony's power dissolves, not through immediate destruction, but through the collapse of loyalty and confidence that follows a decisive defeat. In the months that follow, Antony and Cleopatra take their own lives, and Egypt, the ancient kingdom that had for centuries remained separate from Rome, becomes a Roman province. With Antony gone and Lepidus fading quietly from the political stage, Octavian stands alone as the most powerful man in the Roman world. Yet he does not seize power in the overt manner of a dictator or a king. Instead, he shapes his role with the careful subtlety that has defined his rise from the beginning. He presents his authority as a restoration rather than a revolution, claiming to return power to the Senate while maintaining control through influence, loyalty, and the structures he has meticulously assembled. When the Senate grants him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, it signals a transformation deeper than any law or decree. Rome has not simply changed leaders, it has changed eras. The Republic, though still spoken of in official documents and ceremonies, now lives only as a formality. The real structure of power has shifted into something new, an imperial system grounded in the authority of a single leader who governs through stability, patronage, and the illusion of shared governance. Augustus cultivates peace, expands infrastructure, reforms laws, supports the arts, and creates the conditions for what will become known as the Pax Romana. Under his guidance, the city transforms into a marble-clad capital worthy of empire. and the world around it begins to orbit a central authority that offers order in exchange for loyalty. Rome, once a republic fueled by the competing ambitions of thousands of citizens, becomes an empire directed by the steady will of one man. And as decades pass, even those who lived through the old system come to accept that something permanent has changed. Children grow up hearing stories of the Republic as if it were a distant period from myth, not the political structure that once governed every aspect of Roman life. The institutions that survived into Augustus G.'s reign continue in name, but operate in ways shaped entirely by the Emperor's presence. The Senate still debates, but rarely decides. Magistrates still hold office, but rarely command. The people still vote in assemblies, but their choices reflect a pageant rather than meaningful control. Thus, the world after Caesar does not resemble the vision of the conspirators who imagined they were saving the Republic. It resembles the world Caesar might have eventually built had he lived longer, a world with a single guiding hand, a world that values stability above political contest, a world ready to enter centuries of imperial rule. The irony settles quietly into the foundations of Roman history. Caesar did not become king, but his death made the monarchy inevitable. Part 15 echoes across an unfinished world. In the decades that follow Augustus's rise, Rome settles into a new rhythm that feels to those living within it both ancient and unfamiliar, as if the city has somehow stepped out of its own skin and reassembled itself into a different shape while still carrying the old bones beneath the surface. Streets that once echoed with the arguments of citizens debating policy now fill instead with the steadier murmur of people discussing imperial announcements, provincial developments, and the distant frontiers where legions march not under the banners of the Republic, but under the name and authority of the emperor. The shift is not abrupt. It unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly, allowing generations to ease themselves into the new order without feeling the jolt of sudden transformation. And yet, viewed from a distance, the change is unmistakable. Rome has moved from a state where many voices struggled to be heard to one where a single guiding presence shapes the horizon. Caesar's name continues to hang in the air of this new world, not as a wound reopened each morning, but as a steady echo that gives meaning to the present. Statues of him stand in public squares, their expressions carved with a dignity that feels half memory, half aspiration. Writers refer to him not as a cautionary tale, but as the pivotal force that allowed Rome to shed its fracturing skin and move toward unity. Even those who once doubted him quietly acknowledge that the imperial structure, however different from the old republic, has brought a stability that many citizens had longed for during the turbulent years of civil conflict. In this way, Caesar's legacy spreads through the city like the warmth that lingers after a fire has been extinguished, softer, indirect, but undeniably present. Over time, people begin speaking of Caesar and Augustus as part of a single, continuous arc, as if the events between them were not ruptures, but natural steps toward the world Rome was always meant to inhabit. Poets write of destiny, historians write of necessity, statesmen speak of balance restored. The conspiracy that sought to save the Republic fades into the background, becoming a chapter studied in schools rather than a memory that shapes policy. Brutus and Cassius transform, in the collective imagination, into figures of complex tragedy rather than guardians of liberty, men whose intentions may have been honorable, but whose actions misread the shifting values of their time. The Republic they died for becomes less a living ideal and more a relic preserved in marble inscriptions, admired for its beauty but no longer capable of directing the future. Beyond Rome, the world adjusts itself to the empire's new posture. Provinces that once negotiated with competing Roman leaders now receive consistent instructions from a central authority. Trade routes expand, carrying goods and ideas across continents with a reliability that earlier generations could not have imagined. Cities far from the Tiber feel Rome's presence not through legions alone, but through architecture, law, currency, and language. The Mediterranean slowly transforms into a Roman lake, a vast interior sea shaped by the rhythms of imperial policy, its shores connected not only by conquest, but by the flow of merchants, scholars, artisans, and travelers who moved beneath a shared political sky. And yet, beneath all this emerging order, something deeper occurs. The idea of Rome shifts from being a place to being a principle. Under Augustus and those who follow him, Roman identity becomes a kind of passport into a world structured around civic duty, public works, and imperial belonging. People who never set foot in the capital begin to speak of themselves as Romans. The empire's roads, bridges, aqueducts, and cities become threads stitching together a vast and diverse tapestry, binding communities across immense distances into a shared sense of participation in something larger than themselves. As the empire grows, so too does the memory of Julius Caesar, not simply as a military commander or political reformer, but as the hinge upon which Rome turned. Historians debate whether he intended to dismantle the Republic, whether he sought monarchy in all but name, or whether he believed sincerely in a version of popular rule tempered by strong leadership. Yet even these debates reinforce the same truth. The world after Caesar cannot be separated from the world shaped by his presence. His life becomes the pivot between eras, the moment when Rome's long experiment in shared governance confronted the pressures of expansion, inequality, ambition, and instability, and ultimately found itself unable to sustain its old rhythms. In the quiet spaces of private homes, during evening meals, around oil lamps, in whispered conversations between parents and children, stories of Caesar's life evolve into something softer and more reflective. People speak of his clemency, his reforms, his vision for expanding Roman citizenship, and his ambition to bring order to lands scattered across the Mediterranean. They speak also of his flaws, for Rome's memory is generous but not blind, yet these flaws appear increasingly as human traits rather than political crimes. The assassination, once justified by its perpetrators as a defense against tyranny, begins to seem less like the salvation of Rome and more like the spark that set into motion forces beyond anyone's control. Even the senators who supported Augustus feel, over the years, a curious melancholy when thinking back to Caesar's final months, those days when Rome stood precariously between systems, unsure whether it was walking into Renaissance or dissolution. They recall the intensity of public affection for him, the strange blend of admiration and fear he inspired, and the delicate balance he attempted to maintain between old traditions and emerging realities. In this retrospective light, Caesar becomes a mirror through which Rome sees not only what it was, but what it could have been, had compromise, patience, or simple time offered a gentler transition. As Augustus strengthens the empire's foundations, the distant ripples of Caesar's death reach into realms far beyond politics. Artists, sculptors, and playwrights explore themes of fate, loyalty, betrayal, and the burden of leadership. Philosophers reflect on the tension between personal virtue and public duty. Generations of students study the speeches, letters, and decisions of Caesar, finding in them a portrait of a man both assured and uncertain, powerful and vulnerable, visionary and flawed. The emotional landscape of his story becomes part of the Roman imagination, a reminder that the path of history is often shaped not only by decisions, but by the fragile humanity behind them. In the centuries that follow, even as emperors rise and fall, even as the empire expands and contracts, the memory of Caesar remains woven into the identity of Rome. His name becomes a title, Caesar, passed from one ruler to the next, a linguistic bridge between past and present. His legacy becomes the quiet foundation upon which an entire world builds its sense of order, structure, and destiny. And long after the empire itself fades, long after marble cracks and roads are reclaimed by earth, long after languages change and borders shift, the story of Caesar continues to echo as a lesson in the complexities of power, the fragility of states, and the enduring consequences of moments when fear and ambition collide. In this way, the world after Caesar does not simply belong to emperors or armies, or the political transformations that reshaped Rome. It belongs also to the quieter truths that linger in the shadows of history, the truth that a single life can redirect the course of nations, the truth that ideals can crumble beneath the weight of circumstance, and the truth that even centuries later, we still look back at the Ides of March not as an isolated act, but as a turning point that allowed an empire to emerge from the fractures of a republic that could no longer sustain itself. And so, as you let the final threads of this story settle, imagine Rome not as a single place or time, but as an immense tapestry stretching across ages, a republic striving for balance, an empire reaching for eternity, and at the center of its transformation, the quiet figure of Julius Caesar, shaping a world he would never see, influencing generations he would never know, and leaving behind a legacy that time continues to unfold, softly and endlessly. The world remembers you.